Our proud sponsors of Royal Outdoor Experience is Baronet Blinds, River's Edge Stands, Strike King, Lose, Crappie Magnets, Mossy Oak, Foot on the Head Calls, Scent Thief, and Grizzly Sunglasses.
Good morning, everyone. This is Royal Peterson, and we are doing our Royal Peterson Outdoor episode here. If you remember right, we were meeting with some of the people that we're aligned with our company, and today we're excited to have Crappie Magnets here, Jeff Smith, and it's been a great relationship that we've formed with him right now. I want to remind everyone that is listening to our podcast on Royal Outdoor Experience, we are on Spotify, and we're also on YouTube, so you can look that up. We're definitely a big sponsor with Missouri Hunting Fishing Adventures, and that's a company that I'm a director of operations with. We have a lot of turkey hunters coming in and cast and blast with our crappie fishing as well. And so this is going to be a great segue into our crappie season. And we had a chance. Hey, Jeff, we actually had a chance to talk a little bit at the Bassmaster Classic. Yes. It was not too long ago, didn't we?
That's right. That was just this past weekend. Yeah.
Hey, we just want to welcome you to the show. We know that you're a busy man, and I know you're taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. And we just want to thank you for being on our show.
Oh, thanks for having me. I've always enjoyed talking to you about what you do up there in Missouri, because it sounds like a different world than we are in. And it's only like 8 hours away, but it's like a different world.
That's right. It really is. The topography is quite a bit different, but in some ways it's the same. We have a lot of reservoir water here, and I know you have a lot of creek water down in that area. And we just have a little bit different topography than what you have. But the thing that I see a lot of similarities is your landscape, and as far as your mountains, the Ozark Mountains kind of move down in your part of the world and everything. But today I really want to get into a little bit about what Crappie Magnets is all about, and I want to talk to you. Guys that are listening today, I'm just telling you, and I've said this many times, it's so awesome to have the opportunity to look out of the eyes of someone that has designed this type of equipment, has used this type of equipment. And it's always those small little details that makes the difference between catching your limit, not catching your limit. And today you're going to be looking out of Jeff Smith's eyes, and you're going to be hearing the things that he has done with these baits. And you're going to have a chance today to listen to some of the methodologies that he has behind how to use these baits and why they're designed the way they are. And, our connection kind of started with Mike Miller, and that's a kind of a mutual friend of ours, isn't it, Jeff?
Yeah, Mike Miller, the turkey killer, has been a friend for a long time. We've been friends with Duck Commander for 30 years with Willie and the crew. I went to college with Willie, so that relationship started a long time ago. So anybody that worked with them typically became good friends of ours because they like to hunt and fish, and the fishing side came to me. All of those guys come up here and fish with me quite a bit. We have some of the best fishing in the world right here in Arkansas. So Mike bought into what we did very, very quickly. And what I mean by that is some of the stuff we do is not normal. And when you fish with us, you want to change pretty quickly a lot of times, because what we do is very effective as far as catching trout, panfish, crappie, those species. The light, ultralight fishing that we do is a really unique thing. And I didn't think it was a unique thing. It's just what I did to catch fish 30 some years ago. And so as we started making lures, it was just natural for us to do what we were doing. But we knew we were out fishing everybody, especially trout. That's where it started. But Mike bought into those things. He went to 2-pound test real quick. And so he would do things that a lot of people, even in that group of friends and documentary friends, would not do until they fished with me quite a bit and started to see the difference in buying into this idea that, if you downsize, a lot of times you'll catch a whole lot more fish. And you still catch big ones too.
And that takes me back kind of to our last episode. We actually had Mike Miller in the studio here with us, and every year we have an annual fishing trip together just to kind of get caught up in our worlds and kind of see what's going on out there in the hunting industry. And it's always a fun reunion. And so we had him actually in the studio here last, well, it was the last episode, which was 2 weeks ago. And I got really a good idea, of some of the colors he likes to use. And every fish we caught, I'd say we caught over 100 crappies that day. And we got a very, very special lake that's a private lake that our owner has. And, any of those fish there will run between 14 to 22 inches.
Oh, my goodness.
It's a very special place. And we had a very special day on the water. But you touched on something that I definitely wanted to touch on anyway. Just start, kind of tell us the background of your company. I know that you went to school with Willie, but I also know that you had some alignment with them with Fin Commander as well.
Yeah.
And so I just want to kind of let you go ahead and go with that and kind of discuss, your background with how you started your company and then how you got involved with Fin Commander. And I think people would be interested in that because people I know have seen those displays in Walmarts and et cetera.
Yeah. God has a way of connecting dots that sometimes, I don't know why they get connected the way they do, but when I were in school together, I was finishing up harding when he came in. He was married, so it was a little bit different. He got married like the day before school started too, which was really kind of crazy. But he was in the same major I was. And you would think, knowing him and then knowing me, that we would have been business majors. We were not. We were education majors. And so we started out on the wrong.
God love you.
Yeah, we started out on the wrong path. It was a good path, but it was not the path I needed to be on.
Right.
But anyway, so we had a lot in common, obviously. We loved the outdoors and certain things that we connected with and sports in particular. But then I graduated from Harding and I moved back to Pennsylvania. He went back to Louisiana. We lost track of each other for about 5 years. And I came back to Searcy in 1998. And when I did, one day I was actually on the campus of the college that he and I went to. And I'm walking across the student center. I'm like, dude, there's Jess Robertson, which is what we've all known him as. It was never Willie. Uh-huh. And so I went up and we, obviously great to see each other. That started that relationship all over again. When I moved back here, this is the best trout fishing in the world. And so he, especially all of his crew, would come up and go fishing with me. So that's how that relationship was rekindled. But in that middle time, when I left here, went back to West Virginia, that's when I met a guy named Todd Leland Gaynor. And he took me trout fishing, and my world was turned completely upside down. The first day we went, we caught 98 trout, and it completely changed how I saw fishing. I grew up trout fishing, not well at all, and we didn't catch them. And here I went with this guy. He had one lure, and when I got done that day, my questions were a mile long. A lot of times the same questions your listeners will have. How do you catch that many fish? What are the details you're doing that I was never doing before? And so that started a relationship with Todd and I. For years, we became trout bums. And we just traveled around the state of West Virginia, fishing. Well, in that time, we knew we could catch them if we were the first ones there or in a stretch there wasn't a lot of pressure. But we needed something different. And that's when his brothers brought in a jig, which jig for trout fishing back in the 90s didn't exist. You might see a few marabou jigs, stuff like that. But anyway, so we started making what we called the jig at the time. Which was just a panfish jig, but it fell completely flat in the water. And so that jig completely changed everything, because everywhere we would go at that point, we would outfish everybody. Didn't matter if they were there all day, didn't matter how long they were there. I'd step up first cast, just start whacking them. So for several years we did that, and that was a whole lot of fun, right? I didn't, the idea of selling it was not an option. In fact, we had rules. Todd and I had rules. You don't carry more than you can use that day. Kind of sounds like the children of Israel is give us our daily bread, right? Because we didn't want to have to feel like we couldn't sell it to somebody. I only have enough for today, so I don't have any. I didn't feel like a jerk not giving it to someone.
Sure.
And so it's one of those things where we just, really enjoyed the process of having something that nobody else did. Well, it got to be where people were following us. It just was like they thought it was a location. Then they found out it was the lure, and then they kept wanting to buy it and asking us over and over again, is there anything on the market like it? No, there really wasn't. All the jigs that were on the market fell headweight and fast. And even if you tied a 1/80th ounce marabou jig at the time, the head would fall fast. You have to lift it up. So this jig falling a neutral buoyancy almost was not on the market.
Mm-hmm.
So during that time, I was in a spiritual downfall. I was just in a spot in my life where I wasn't in a good place, and I was not in a good location. I was in a spot where, I didn't have a lot of support, because what I had gone through had kind of alienated me from a lot of people and a lot of friends. And so I was just kind of like, man, I'm in a place I don't want to be. But we started this business, and I started selling. First sale ever was to Walmart, which is crazy. God connected a dot where I met a guy in the store, and I took he and his dad fishing. He was over the whole East Coast Walmarts, and we sold.
That's a pretty good connection, Jeff.
It was God connecting that, because the manager of the store we couldn't sell to Walmart. I said, okay, and he said, well, meet this guy. So I met that guy, and he was in town. His dad was from Illinois, I believe, and they wanted to go trout fishing where I lived. So we took him the next day, and the Trout Magnet did what it always had done, just whack him. So we got into the store, and things were still spiraling out of control for me. And so I moved back to Arkansas. That's when I moved back, left the facility there, and left everything behind, because I thought this is where I was supposed to be to turn my life back around. And it was God called me back here very, very clearly. I did not want to be here at all. I wanted to be back there running that business. It was my dream. And I felt that I couldn't, I wasn't going to be happy back there. And I knew that. And I knew I couldn't thrive. So come back here, my life turned back around, got connected to the right people. My relationship with God changed. My faith completely flipped upside down. I realized a lot of the things that had happened were because of choices I'd made, not necessarily circumstances. So now I'm in the right spot, and the business actually came back to me. I thought it would die while I was gone, because we only made the Trout Magnet, and I'll show you. This is one of the original packs of Trout Magnets right here. This is what I was making back in 1997 and 98. I had the blister machine in my house, and I put that little card in it, and I'd make them. That's, that thing right there is 30 years old almost. And so,
wow, that's cool. That's an archive there.
It is an archive. And so I had these, and 8 colors is all we were selling at the time. And so I thought the business would die, but it didn't. It wasn't supposed to. It actually increased. And Todd didn't want to run the business at the time. He had got another opportunity to do something else. And so I started running the business in Arkansas again. And then we added the crappie stuff, because everybody was using the Trout Magnet for crappie. And that whole story is a shabacle, because actually the largest retailer in the world asked me to make a crappie magnet, because back then in 2000, 2001 and 2, there weren't a whole lot of crappie lures out there. There weren't crappie brands on the market. And so I made the Trout Magnet bigger so it would fall flat like a crappie magnet. In small ponds, it worked really good. In lakes, it did not. And most people fish for crappie in lakes. And so it plummeted. It just crashed, and so we didn't do well with that. And so I kind of got out of it until I met a guy in Nashville, Tennessee, who told me what I'd done wrong. And so we redesigned it, and it got back to that idea that I did after I caught those 98 trout. What was he doing that was different? And it was rod, a line, equipment, location, presentation, and lure. It was all those things. And if you miss one of those, you're pretty much in trouble. And so,
you reiterate that one more time for the listeners. That you said something there that they need to hear again. Those components.
There's a handful in there that are super significant. You have to know the equipment. Your equipment is crucial. So his line, his rod, especially the line at the time, he's using 3-pound Maxima Chameleon line at the time, which I'd never even heard of, never even seen 3-pound line. Now we're using 2-pound, right? So the equipment is super important. Location, super important.
Yes.
You have to be able to read the water and know the exact spot the trout like to be. Crappie are the same, and eliminate the dead water. So equipment, location, presentation, and that's it. And then the last one being the lure that we had too, but that's a part of your equipment. So in my opinion, it comes down to those 3: equipment, location, presentation. And in the equipment was that Trout Magnet. And so if you don't follow one and the details in all 3 of those, you typically lose. And the details are the absolute significant part. You look at the Bassmaster Classic, you look at those who win and lose, Man, sometimes it's a difference between adding a little weight to a jerk bait than it is anything.
Yep.
And so it's the details and locating them. It can be the biggest part of the job is locating fish. But with the equipment we have now, you can find it. Trout fishing in streams. Typically, you can see the seams or a little bit deeper areas behind a pool or behind a riffle that creates a pool. Those trout like to go into them. And so you can find them. But then when you get there, what do you do with it? We first noticed right off the bat, the first 3 years of business, when we were selling just that package of lures in 8 colors, people would call us and go, "Hey, I got the Trout Magnet. I've heard all these crazy stories of how good it works, but I can't catch anything." And I'd always say the same thing. Well, that's because you're an idiot. I'm kidding. I wouldn't say that. I'd say the very first question. Do you know what the first question was? Roy, what do you think the first question I asked them was?
Well, it'd probably be what equipment are you using?
Equipment. What pound test are you fishing?
Yep.
That's the very first question. If people listen to this and they use a Trout Magnet and they're using 6-pound test, they don't like us very much because you can't even cast it. You're not going to catch much. You might catch a few brim and maybe some crappie on it, but you can't even cast it. 4-pound test is the high end for the Trout Magnet in particular and the small jigs. And here's what I would say. If you crappie and brim and trout fish, 4-pound test needs to be the highest you ever use. There's not a trout in this world that'll break my 4-pound test. In fact, the world record was caught here in Arkansas, 40 pounds, 4 ounces back in 93 on 4-pound test. I could have caught it on my 2-pound test if it hit it too. But
you're just affirming so many things that I've said over the years because I grew up ice fishing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's that pound test line and the fall is everything in ice fishing, and it's just it's great for them to hear this. You're doing great.
Yeah, so that's the equipment and the location and presentation are a big part of it. And so as we were making these lures, we found out that the details made all the difference in the world. People for years have copied the Trout Magnet. In fact, we just had a recent one just in the past couple months copy it what they thought is to a T. It's not though. They're missing one of the very valuable parts of the Trout Magnet. And so when you start looking at a lure, a lot of times, and that lure there might actually work in other spots the Trout Magnet doesn't work. Because most of the time, a lure is created for a particular environment. The Trout Magnet is created for small streams and for ponds and lakes where you're fishing shallow. And in that environment, if you watch our videos and see how we use it, it's very difficult to beat. But if you're fishing deep or faster water, for trout in particular, you need something heavier. So knowing what that lure is designed to do is super significant. If you remember back in West Virginia, as we were making this lure, we're fishing, streams 20 feet wide, maybe 30 in some places, right?
Sure.
It's just not big streams. I could watch the trout respond to the lure. Mm-hmm. And man, that's when you know you got something or not, when they're responding to that lure and reacting to it. But now here in Arkansas, we can't see that as much. So now we use an indicator and we drift it over top of their heads. So you have to know how that lure was designed or what it was designed for to use it properly. And even the stuff you got there in front of you, there's uniqueness to each of those things on there that you have to know, what was that lure right there designed to do? It was designed to fit in this box. People always ask, Jeff, do you steer people away from using other brands? Absolutely not. Because I guarantee you there's some really good brands out there that have some things we don't. In environments and in waters that we don't.
Sure.
I just hope we have something that fits something they like to do in the area and water they're fishing.
The thing that when I was introduced to it, and my background was, based out of a bait shack. My dad ran a bait shack for over 30 years, and
wow.
We had many, many lakes around us. And so I grew up in a bait shack, and I made a lot of sinkers. I made a lot of jig heads. I made a lot of plastic skirts for jigs, and we did a lot of, the look of the beetle spin type of look.
Yeah.
We did our own MEP spinners. That's why we squirrel hunted, because we needed tails for our MEP spinners that we made. And our big selling point was our plastic worms. And so we made, I don't know how many molds we had for plastic worms that we would make. And so, when I visited your plant, I mean, it was kind of a kid in a candy store. I didn't say a whole lot, but in my mind, I was just going back in time and how I grew up and seeing everything that you had going on there. And so when I started using your equipment, of course, was introduced to me by Mike. You know, all I saw was quality,
Thanks.
and then I liked the fall of the bait. I liked the way the lead head would backpedal in the water, and once you pulled it, it would stalemate, and how it would stay vertical in the water, or excuse me, horizontal in the water. And you know, those were things that stood out to me right off the bat. And then the other thing that I really liked was the size of everything. I've always, you know, I fished competitively since I was 14 years old, and downsizing was how I had to get my limits many a times.
Mhm.
And being in the background of the ice fishing, I love the size of your panfish bobbers and your trout magnet bobbers. And of course, you know, they call it strike indicators, you know, in many parts of the world. But those things there, you know, people don't realize that the resistance on that fish when they actually grab a bait really dictates, you know, how they commit to it.
Yeah.
And, you know, that on Lake of the Ozarks was a game changer for us to use a panfish bobber during the spawn following a very, very pressured lake where people are throwing, you know, weighted bobbers that are 3 times the size,
Yeah.
and they're not seeing the strike. The fish are feeling that resistance. They're not getting, and that was one of the things right off the bat that was a game changer for the people that I was guiding, because they're like, how are we catching fish in behind these people? I said, one, we have the right bait. Two, we have the right equipment. And being the equipment is that we have a bait that's doing something that their bait's not doing. Not to mention we have color selections that are matching water clarity. And then we got a bobber that is totally different than what they're throwing, and it's not offering any resistance to that fish to go ahead and take it down. And it really has been a game changer for us as guides, and that's all we use in our 3 boats all spring long is the crappie magnets. And last year, you know, during our crappie season, the crappie magnet put 1,600 fish in our boats.
Wow, that is awesome.
Yeah.
You know, you look at our baits. To be honest with you, though, Roy, and you go, man, that doesn't look very good. I mean, the crappie magnet does not have a great look about it. It really doesn't. But the split tail of that bait makes a difference,
Oh,
and,
sure.
and you hit it, the size.
Yep.
We are making a giant one right now for the Mississippi people in the muddy water. But I promise you, 99.9% of the time, that crappie magnet or trout magnet are the 2 baits I'm going to be using. I don't know why they like it. I have no idea. I mean, there's baits out there that look like little minnows. Heck, I fished beside minnows before and spanked them with it. I definitely don't get that one, right? Because everyone goes, little minnow looking bait. Well, maybe. Then why does it outfish it sometimes? Not saying all the time. Not saying that, right? Because I know minnows sometimes are hard to beat. But most of the time, I'll be right there with a minnow or beat it. And I think because the color is the big thing.
Oh, sure, sure. And it emulates a lot of things too. And in my mind, you know, right off the bat, when you look at it for me, I see a waxworm.
Yeah.
I see a grub.
Yeah.
I see, you know, a larva. You know, I those are the things right off the bat that stick out to me that it emulates. And then those legs that come out the back, I mean, that when they start vibrating, and this is something that I want you to elaborate a little bit on, is the presentation. How do you use that? But one of the things that I found out with my clients is that we kind of have a cadence that we use with that crappie magnet that makes a difference in our strike ratio. And
How are you fishing it? Tell me how you're fishing it.
we're fishing it very simple. We're 16 to 18 inches underneath that panfish bobber. And if I move to the trout magnet, I'll use the very, very smallest one, 32nd ounce split shot up above it, about 4 inches. And we really, really emphasize making sure that we have a tight cinch knot on it, that we keep that bait horizontal all the
Yeah,
time.
very good. Very good.
And we're bringing it through the water column in a basically a 3 beat ratio, where we take it, throw it out, and we bring it back, jigging it 1, 2, 3, and we let it set. 1, 2, 3,
Good.
and let it set.
Yeah.
And the faster that you can jig that and cause more vibration through that rod when you're doing that jig, and travel less with it, the more strikes that we get.
Interesting.
And I had a client last year from Sparta, Tennessee, and he was struggling. He was struggling that day, and the biggest issue that I saw was he was just tugging it.
Yeah.
He'd just tug it, and then he'd tug it maybe 4 inches, and then he'd take up his slack.
Yeah.
And I said, Bill, we really need to get you in that cadence. And I said, you just got to jig that thing, pop it 3 times, 1, 2, 3, real quick, and let it set. And it's just short jigs. And I really think that causes those legs to really, really bounce.
You bet. If you look at these things, you can't hold it still, right? And so as you're moving it, the crappie actually sees it more like that, right? They see that split. And so your first point of making sure the knot is tight is very important, because you want that bait to look horizontal, not like this or head down. And so people always say, is loop knot good? Yeah, loop knot's great, except I like mine to be tight, because when I stop it, it sits like this and not like this.
That's
or
right.
like this, right? And so when I'm using a float, 100% tight knot, 99.9% of the time I'm using a tight knot, because the only time I don't is when I'm swimming it more, and that is without a float and swimming it back, and I want that thing moving around a little more. But even then, the tight knot, I think, on this style of fishing is better. We've noticed over the years, and I don't have a good jig head right here with me. We noticed over the years that a lot of times, if that bait gets just a little bit crooked on the hook, they won't even like it. And so there's something about the straight horizontal presentation that turns a crappie on. Your cadence is important, but the stop is important. This bait works best when it stops, and it does that right there. And that thing moves just, not at all, but enough that tail just keeps moving a little bit. And for some reason, that straight horizontal, as they look up and they see that split, man, it gets them unglued. Trout magnet and crappie magnet, both. And a lot of it is the horizontal presentation and the stop. I want that thing to stop above them where they look at it. A crappie doesn't think about things a whole lot. He either wants it or he doesn't. And when that stop happens, you don't have to wait very long, and you don't know if he's going to eat it. Now, there's sometimes of the year when they're, not real active, that you can keep it above them a little bit and they'll sip up to it. But for the most part, once I get it above them and it stops right there, he's going to look at it and say yes or no pretty much that quick.
And we do a lot of long pulling, in Missouri, because we have Truman Reservoir with a lot of trees, and then of course Lake the Ozarks, we're around a lot of docks there, and so the crappie magnet has been very effective on long pulling for us as well. In fact, I have some clients that that's how they want to fish. They don't want to use a spinning rod or anything of that nature and making a cast. They've been brought up with a 14-foot pole, and so we do a lot of that as well. And same scenario, when you get 10 feet of line out and drop it down on your cover and jiggle that tail is the enticer. Man, that's what just flings a craving on them. And that's, we don't have any traveling, with the bait when we're doing that, but still that tail is what does it.
You bet. I think the size is the biggest part of it. When we've made this thing just a little bit different size, they don't like it as much. There's something about that size of that bait, especially for black crappie. Black crappie typically like smaller presentations, and that's why I use the crappie magnet, the original crappie magnet, which is, just a split tail grub, and then the trout magnet, which is the same thing on even a smaller scale. Between those two, if I'm in a clear reservoir, that's where I want to be.
The thing that some people don't think about, which was something that I was kind of introduced to right off the bat, is using the trout magnet for crappie, and how to even downsize that bait even more early in the year when that water temperature is just barely, hitting 45 degrees and they're really lethargic and they just don't want anything really big, is to go to the trout magnet and present it in the same manner that you're presenting it, as a crappie magnet. And boy, I tell you what, we've had great luck with that.
Yeah, this past fall, I went up to Greer's Ferry, which is here, in Arkansas, and it's a super clear, deep lake. And one of my buddies was catching them really good on crappie magnets, and he called me. It was during deer season, and said, "Come on, go fishing with me." So I went up, and as I don't like going not in my boat because I don't have something when I get there I need. It's like, oh man, I forgot. So as I'm going out the door, I'm grabbing all this stuff, and I saw a 6'6" TCB rod over in the corner with a float on it, and I knew what it was when I saw it. One of our trout setups, got 2-pound test, 2-pound fluorocarbon leader, float, and a trout magnet.
Sure.
Grabbed that pole, grabbed up my long pole because that's what he was doing, even though it was clear water. The fish were down about 15 feet deep. Go to the first spot. He catches one or two. We can see the fish, but they're not responding to the crappie magnet. The ones that were, it was pretty lethargic and it was just not a good bite. And so I'm like, man, I said, let me try my trout magnet. So I'm like, let me try it. I've already got it on this pole over here. So I take the float off. And I have a 6'6" pole. When I see a fish out there about 15 feet deep, 30 feet out, and I cast that trout magnet, and here it goes. I mean, it felt like it took forever, right? It's just falling. You can see that little trout magnet, 64th of an ounce. And it gets down above that fish. And right before it gets done, I kind of feather it up a little bit, and it just sits right there above him just for a second. Oh, man. First time all day we saw smoked it. Because you could probably see that thing falling for 10 or 15 feet as clear as the water was. At least 10. And so I went to absolutely smashing them just on a trout magnet. What was unique about it is my buddy was fishing the crappie magnet, not catching as many, but he couldn't go to that trout magnet because he had too heavy of a line. And right, this 2-pound test, I was throwing it out there, and as it fell, I just kind of touched right above them, and it just kind of feathered it. You could see it on the live scope. It would just come down and kind of do this number and kind of sit right there for a second, smoke it. I think it's the size and the way it falls.
Oh, I'm sure.
And so that day, we kept 60, the nicest crappie you've ever seen, and almost all of them came on that trout magnet. And it got to be, watch Jeff, because I had the setup, and you had to have that light line to do it. The next day, he was in my shop. He was my buddy from Heber. He drove down to get light line and the trout magnets. And so, the head makes a difference on that one because it's a shad dart head, the way it falls.
I was listening to you, talking about the light line. We're when we have clients come, I always tell them that we're going to use our equipment. And because we're rigged the way we know that it's going to be effective. And who knows what we get into once we start allowing them to bring their equipment. But the one deviation that we do a little bit differently than what you do is that, on Lake of the Ozarks, we still have some pretty good brush piles and cover. And we try to stay to 6-pound test on it. And the only reason we do that is because we get clients that will wrap it around a stick or something. And a lot of times we can pull it loose without getting in there and spooking the fish on that cover. And so we try to stay 6-pound test. Now, when I go to Lake of the Ozarks, which is a lot clearer on the north side of it from where we are on Deer Creek side of it, you get up in that water, and I mean, you can see down a lot of times, 4 or 5 feet deep. And so what we do up there is we go ahead and get into that 2-pound test line with a very light bait so that they can see that fall. And I will say it's hard to see on live scope a lot of times, but
it is very much so.
Once we see the fish, we know we're on the fish, the bite takes care of itself.
You bet.
So we don't necessarily have to see the actual fish coming up on the bait, but it's very effective in both ends of the lake. But we do change the pound test based on
that's very smart
that we're fishing.
Yeah, most people won't do that because I use 6-pound when I'm using a 1/8 ounce jig head on a crappie magnet, and there's no problem there. But when you start going down to those 1/32, and especially the 1/64, it just doesn't work the same.
That's right.
Did you see the new 1/64 ounce eye hole we have? Have you seen that yet?
I did, and I don't know if I saw it when we were there at the Bassmaster Classic, but I think I saw it online. I think I saw you talking about it there.
Yeah. And so the uniqueness of that is this, is the eye hole jig takes the lead is a 64th, but to make it a 64th with a hole in it, we've doubled the size.
Okay.
And so I videoed this past last summer, with trout magnets, and man, you could see it easy because that head is so big.
Okay.
But it actually fishes very similar to a trout magnet because I take slab bites and put in the eye, which adds a flotation.
Okay.
So it helps it fall. It still falls a little bit headway, but not as much as a normal jig would, especially a 32nd or larger, which is the size of that head. So the live scopers, as we're watching it, that 64th in that eye hole is a really, really, really good deal for those clear lake
awesome.
crappie you're fishing for.
Well, and another thing that we do is we'll put a bead up above it.
Yeah.
Just
So
like we're throwing a Carolina rig, we'll put a bead and a stopper up above it, maybe, 10, 15 inches up above it, just so that we also have something else that we're seeing on our live scope.
Absolutely.
And, it's just another way to be able to identify it as it's coming down through the water column. But those are all great things for people to know. I mean,
absolutely. And I use that type of technique when I'm in more stained water. It doesn't seem to affect them at all. It doesn't spook them. In Mississippi, in those areas, we'll use giant jig heads because the only thing that crappie sees is this 6 inches right here. So I'm dropping it down and stopping it right there. And so he'll tip up and eat it, or he won't. He's not seeing the fall or anything above it. So line color and weight doesn't matter. We can fish those quarter-ounce jigs over there in Mississippi a lot of times with a long pole, drop it right on their heads, and it's better because it gets there faster. And that pegged weight, like you're talking about, does that. So in stained water, we definitely add heavier weights or pegged weights just so we can get it down there. It just in those clear lakes, that's when it could. In fact, the day we were fishing on Greer's Ferry, my buddy had 2 crappie magnets, which is the same idea. And you could see it as plain as day. And the crappie would come over, look at it a little bit, and go right back down. And I think there's too much going on sometimes in that clear water. That's when you want that one little jig falling real slow and have a little flutter to it. And those fish, it's more natural to them because they can see it a whole lot better.
I'm interested, Jeff, in what feedback that you've got from clients and friends on the spider rigging with the crappie magnet.
Yeah. So, about 6-7 years ago, that's all we did was we spider rigged double crappie magnets everywhere we went. And it's a slow presentation of 8 poles up front moving around. And I'm really glad I didn't skip that part of my life. Okay. I don't want to go back there a lot of times because it's a very tedious job, 8 poles, 16 total whenever you do the back. And we used to do 16 poles a lot. But I learned so much about crappie during that time frame. One of the big things I learned, color does matter. Color matters a lot. Some days it doesn't, but it does matter.
And you learn that you've had several out there at different colors, and you got one pole that's going wild and the rest of them aren't. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you the best story, and the one that stands out to me in my mind was there's this lake down south here, about 30, 40 minutes from here. And I told my nephew one day, I was like, hey, listen, tomorrow morning before church, let's go. I said, I know they're there. The river had just fallen out, and they're stacked up in there. And it's an oxbow lake, and so we got there way before daylight, and we're pulling out onto the lake, and we get all of our poles out. Well, we catch a few. Well, then I'm catching one continually on a white and an electric blue crappie magnet, and caught another one. So I put another one on. Now the only 2 poles catching fish are those 2. So I'm like, surely not. Brad, put one on. Puts one on. Doesn't catch one. Doesn't catch one. I'm like, that's kind of weird. So we fish a little bit more. I go to 3 poles. Now I'm handing him poles, right? And I'm going, what in the world? I got 3 poles with white and electric blue. No other poles are going under. You've got white electric blue over here. Why is it not working? He put it back up, and I'm like, surely that's not it. He had double chartreuse heads on both of his. I had double nickel heads on both of mine. Okay. I'm like, all right, give me it here. I take them off, put nickel on his. He started catching them.
Isn't that crazy?
So now he switches to two sets of nickels with white. We couldn't even get his last 2 poles out because I had 3, he had 2, and the only ones catching of the 8 poles was that white with electric blue with a nickel head. I don't know what it looked like or what it was doing for them,
Oh,
but
I've
it
seen it many
was
times like that. Just one
everything
little
else
thing.
was
Yeah.
exactly the same. We were the same depth.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, at one point in time, I moved rods to different spots of the floor just to see.
Yeah, I've done that too.
Not it. And so the detail, the things that I learned, when you're spider rigging, when you turn, if the outside pole catches one, you're going too slow. If the inside pole catches them, you're going, too fast.
Yep.
And so all the things I learned about crappie and the presentation from the spider riggers was significant. Now, I'll tell you this, there's still a lot of people that do it because it is fun, but for me, my ADHD can't handle 8 poles. I'm just like, ooh, I
That's
can't focus
stressful.
on it. And so it's stressful. To me, it's stressful.
Yes.
I like taking somebody now. When I take a bunch of people long lining or spider rigging, I can put them in a boat and run my boat with my trolling motor. It's to me probably the easiest way to take 4 people and myself crappie
Yep.
fishing. I just don't do it as much anymore, but I learned a lot, and you can crappie magnet fish. Now, people for years were going, I spider rig it, but I put a minnow on it. Well, Godwin in particular would do that, put a minnow between the tail of that trout magnet, and it does add the color and the scent of the minnow.
Mm-hmm.
No question that works. Most of the time, I didn't need that minnow. Most of the time, not until dead of summer, or sometimes that the bite really slowed down late summer. But most of the time, a crappie magnet and a slab bite makes a difference. That's the other thing I learned in spider rigging. My dad.
That's something we haven't talked about. Talk to us a little bit about that slab bite.
Yeah, so
That's something that I definitely use when things slow down.
you bet. So here's how it happened. In fact, I didn't use bait that much until I fished with Dude Maddox out of Nashville, Tennessee, and he's like, Jeff, it's the real deal. And he is a legend in the crappie fishing world. And so he got me to using them, and I'm like, but these things fall off every time. So to me, I wanted to design one that stayed on the tip of the hook better. That was my original thought, right?
Sure.
And when we started spider rigging, my dad was a very, very focused man when it came to the slab bites. If one was good, 3 was way better. So most of his jigs had 2 or 3 on the tips of the hook, and I promise there's not there's not even a thought in my mind. He would catch more in a day's time because he took the time to put those on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I saw it back then. I saw it. So we used those slab bites religiously for the past 20 years. And it wasn't until Blake Phillips invented the eye hole jig that a really good solution to the slab bites falling off came around. And I was helping Blake. Did you get to meet Blake while you were there at Bassmaster?
I don't know if I saw him there, and I think that you had spoke to him, but it seems like didn't he come in and to the shop when I was there? And I think I met him there.
That's exactly right. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
I think he came in and I met him there. Yes.
Yeah. So Blake, he and his wife were fishing and doing the same problem that they're falling off with every fish. And so he just drilled a hole in the eye. It's a brilliant idea. It's patent pending right now and should be, patented here hopefully in the next few months. But it's one of those ideas. You just shove the bait in that eye hole and it stays in there. And now 20, 30 fish or more on one little piece of bite.
That's the difference right there. That's exactly right.
Yeah, and it speeds your time up too.
Yeah, it survives many fish, and you don't have to deal with that.
That's right.
It's still there. Throw it back out again. It's still there. Throw it back out again. I mean, yeah, that's a huge thing.
Yes, it is. And so the scent matters for crappie. For trout, I don't see it mattering as much. Bluegill, it really matters. Scent for them is king. It really is. When you use a worm or a cricket, you know what happens.
Oh, yeah.
And so a trout magnet is the best brim bait that we have. And it'll spank a cricket most of the time in the summertime because that slow fall. You add a slab bite to it, and it just gets destroyed. And you don't need those crickets to mess with too. And that's the weird thing about it is a lot of people go, well, I use bait because I can catch more. And I'm like, man, I know there's days that the bait fishermen that go with me can do it. Most of the time, because we're so efficient with the way we fish it, I'm not constantly going back to get bait or putting something on. I'm back in the water. It comes off. A trout magnet and crappie magnet both hook it on the roof of the mouth too. And so it's pop off back in the water or keep the fish, whatever you want to do, like that. Where when I use bait or minnows, and I used them for years, It just seems like it's a lot longer process. It's deeper. I'm getting hook out and I got to dig around to get a minnow. You know, with the right presentation of the right lures, you're right up there with the numbers you're catching with those minnows.
And
For
you know,
sure.
the thing that we do a lot during the summertime when that thermocline's really established on Truman is a lot of vertical fishing on cover.
Hmm.
And you know, we do a lot of dipping and we just have trees that sometimes will just harbor fish a lot better than other trees. And so you're going to concentrate on that tree for quite a while and
Yes.
you're gonna knock out several fish. But the thing I like about when you're using that slam bite is that if you're continually to fish in that tree vertically and say that you most time we're down somewhere between 12 to 15 feet, depends where that thermocline is. But I really truly believe it almost creates a slick down there after a while of you
Yeah.
jigging that, and there just becomes a scent uh, conglomerate down there that
Yes.
those fish start moving in on because man, you've been jigging at there, you know, and you've been catching fish there,
You
and it's
bet.
just being dispersed down there, and pretty soon it's almost like chumming, really.
It really is. Yeah, especially with our glitter one, the silver glitter one. When you do that and look in the water, it
Oh yes,
looks like scales down there,
for
and so
sure,
it definitely can create a little bit of a frenzy at times.
for sure. Now, you know, we've been talking a lot about technique and lures and everything. Tell me a little bit about kind of where you guys are now as far as your companies that you're with. Now I know that you know you said Walmart was kind of your first kickoff, but where can people find a crappie magnet other than online, which we'll talk about here in a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of them around the larger box stores. Bass Pro and Cabela's carry a lot of our stuff. Dick's Sporting Goods, Academy sells a lot of our stuff. And so Walmart carries some of the crappie stuff, but not as much as some of the others do. They carry more of our trout products, but they do carry some of the crappie magnet line, especially the crappie magnet bodies, in some of those stores. You know, small shops carry them all over the country, little tackle shops. You know, I like going to those too because they can educate you on the colors and the things that you need. Uh, you know, even our web page is a good resource because typically you can get it within a couple days if you go to our web page. The thing that's unique about our company right now is this. Start out with a trout magnet, then to a crappie magnet. Both of those are vertical style fishing baits.
Hmm?
But we found out real quick that there's a whole lot of different ways to catch crappie. Long lining with John Godwin was the first one we saw, and we're like, well, we don't have that bait. And so he and I designed one probably 10, 12 years ago called the Slab Curly.
Okay.
That thing turned super slow. And the reason we made it the way we did it was because we wanted to use it spider rigging too. And it turns at 0.3. Other curly tails, it takes about a half a mile an hour to get that tail to turn, which is too fast for our spider rigging.
Uh,
So during that process, we made a fin spin, which is a little spinner underspin with a cup on the front to shadow dart. So when it comes through, it pushes the water to the blade. It turns at 0.32. Both of those were designed for spider rigging, but they are a dream for long lining.
mm,
Um, you know, out the back of the boat, moving about
sure.
a mile an hour is long lining. And
Sure.
so those two baits come about. Then we started getting into the Mississippi market, and we added the Fin Spin Pro Series, which is a very flashy bait. It's got a lot of tentacles on it. You can see it on our webpage. And they were adding minnows to it at first, but then they started adding the slab curly to it. That bait has become a phenomenon of its own for power trolling and long lining. It's really a weird looking bait. It's a spinner bait for crappie, basically, is what it is. And most of the places, like up where you are, man, that would not be the lure you'd ever want to throw. So all of these things, like I said before, a lure typically has a use or a place. And so you have to know that. Then we add the little dancer, which is a little paddle tail. And that's for places like up where you are, where the water's clear and
Mhm.
you're going to use a small bait and pitching up under docks and that kind of stuff. And so we started adding all of these different lures.
Just a side note on that, those are great for white bass up here.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, I
I
bet you.
mean, they're just a killer.
Yeah,
They're a small shad to them. I mean,
yeah, that's right.
they'll kill them.
Absolutely. So all these baits have come around when we go to an area, and that's been the fun thing about this is just being blessed to meet people. As I look at my company, I've been able to connect with people all the way back when I met Willie and his crew, and then Godwin. And then, Dude Maddox and Brian Oldham and all the people from 20 years ago that were crappie fishermen that we started hanging out with. And as I fished with them, I started listening to them. And some of them I actually partnered with, like I Hold Jig. He and I are partnered together because that's his idea, not my idea. We just get to sell it. And it's a phenomenal idea. Well, as I meet these people like him and Brandon Smith, who's helped design the hex head or the hammerhead that you have right there. Well, they started fishing these big baits, and I have a slab magnet, which is a really good looking bait for stained water. But as I started talking to Brandon, it was obvious we didn't have what we needed to fish the stained water for long pole and for big crappie. I like your Grenadas and those types of things. So I worked with him, and now we have a giant. It's called the hammer, right? And this isn't even on the market yet. This is some of the first one. You see the difference between a crappie magnet and a hammer. It's gigantic. And so this is used in those lakes when a big presentation, something loud is needed, and you're dropping on that fish. And I know we work in clear water too. We've done that. But it's primarily built for a style of fishing that's done in Mississippi. So all of these products we add, there's so many of them too, are basically, here's the niche of crappie fishing. How do you catch it in that environment? And so a crappie magnet works there, but it's not great because they can't even see this thing in that stained water, right? So you have to make the bait for that. So if you go into a store and you see this bait and it looks good, you start asking the question, what was that made for, right? Is it my water or is it not? I was down in Florida and there's some ocean baits. I go, oh my goodness, that would work great for crappie, right? But they're not even thinking that.
Yeah.
And so, but it's not made for that.
Oh yeah.
But I know I can alter it to get to where I want. So I'm just,
you're right.
That mindset to people is that there's some really good lures out there that on your water, you might not catch a fish. And there's some great lures that if you use it in your water, it will be the lure to catch. Here's a side note to that. People get comfort baits. A bait, I've caught fish on that since I was little, and that's good. That's really good because you fish it a little bit more intently. But don't overlook trying other things because your comfort bait might be holding you back from something that will actually catch a little bit more. And it might not be my bait. It might be one of my baits.
Great advice.
But typically, you'll find something on Lake of the Ozarks that is just the one. There could be 4 or 5 different plastics that work perfect for that lake, but there's going to be 34 others that don't work for that lake. And finding what they are. And I listen, you go to a place, what are you using? Okay, you use that. I hear that 4 or 5 times. Okay, that's the size bait they're wanting. That's the color they want. Do I have something like that? Yes or no? And so you just have to start asking yourself those questions about the place you are fishing and the water you're fishing in.
And as a guide, we take people out, and that's kind of why we started using our own equipment and not allowing them to bring anything, because so often we'd get into these comfort baits that they like to use, and they like this certain setup that they have and this certain technique. And all the time I'm trying to fight them to do what's going to be effective.
And you know how I did that? You know how I used to do that? So back 25, 30 years ago, when I first started my business, the only way I could survive was to guide during the summer.
Right.
And most of the people coming in were coming in to fish a trout magnet with us. That's just why they were coming. And so I fought that so much. I'm like, just use one of mine, just use mine. I got it. I figured it out finally because they never came by themselves. I never had people come in one. There was always 2 of them, right? And so I'm like, I'll make a deal with you. One of you guys use my stuff. The other one use whatever you want to use. It never, ever failed. Within 10 or 15 minutes, can I have what that guy's got? Because they thought they were catching fish.
Yep.
Until they saw the right equipment using the same lure. A lot of them were using trout magnets. And so I learned a lot about that too. And I'll tell you the one I learned the most about, what sticks in my brain about fluorocarbon, was back in, I'm going to say it was early 2000. We sold a rod that was a Trinity rod. It was a green rod, 9-foot rod. If you bought one of those from us, you were in a group that followed us to a T, right? We just didn't sell a lot of them. They were $150 rods at the time. And so you really believed in what we were doing. Well, there was a husband and wife from Jonesboro, Arkansas, that bought 2 of those rods and fished with us quite a bit. Called me and said, hey, Jeff, we'd like to go fishing on this day. It's a couple days down the road. Do you have time to do it? I'm like, I don't. I got a meeting at like 11 o'clock. They're like, listen, we can go daylight and be done by 10. If you can go early. I'm like, okay, I'll do it. So I met them in the dark. And if you've ever seen, we had lights that we put in our floats. and we fished in the dark, right?
Uh-huh.
Caught a few, not very many. As the sun's coming up, not over the trees, the wife starts to bam, bam, bam. And remember, they've got the same equipment.
Sure.
She's in the front of the boat, he's in the back. The water does kind of get deeper as you get down here. So I thought it might have been depth. I changed his depth. She's up, catching one every drift. Every drift. He's every third or fourth drift, right?
Uh-huh.
So I go deeper with his. I switch the color. Now they got the same color on. And the sun's still not even close to coming up over the trees. It's that first 30 minutes, And
Uh-huh.
and we're joking about it. But after a while, I'm like, okay, this isn't funny anymore. Something's different, right? He's not getting the bite she is. And so in that process, she goes, hey, I put fluorocarbon on mine and he doesn't have it. I'm like, it's too dark for that. That can't be it. It was it.
Uh-huh.
And it taught me that fluorocarbon isn't always about the light and what they see. It's how it falls, because fluorocarbon is more dense.
Sure.
And I handed him one of my poles, first cast, second cast, third cast. I'm like, I cannot believe fluorocarbon made that big of a difference. So most of them that have their own equipment aren't following the details to the level that you and I do when they get in the boat.
Oh, that's for
I
sure.
can't tell you how many times, literally hundreds upon hundreds of times, I've taken people, and on the very first cast, we caught one. It was no
A
accident.
good example of that was I was guiding a guy from St. Louis one time, and we were on a fence row, and we were vertical fishing, dipping, and this fence row had decayed over time, and most of the limbs were on the left side of this fence row as we're coming into it. And I kept trying to tell him to stay on this side when you're dipping. And I wasn't fishing, I was just coaching. And he kept wanting to be on the other side over there all the time when he was dipping. And finally, I just grabbed a pole real quick and I dipped on that side and caught a really, really nice 16-inch crappie. And I mean, his little eyes just popped out. And I said, I really need you to be on this side. Be on this side. And he said, well, why is that so important? I said, because that's where all the limbs are still on these trees that are down through here. And so, just that little difference there. And that was a knowledge that I was trying to give him there.
That's right.
And finally, I had to do something to get him to buy into it.
That's right. Yeah.
And once he did.
That's why I always paired them against each other, because I promise, I can't tell you how many times it would be instantaneous. First three casts, this guy would catch one. And like, what's the difference? I'm like, it's the line. You have 4 pound. He's got 2 on his. There's a big difference there. And they'd be like, okay, give it to me right now. Right. It'd be quick. Time it'd take 15, 20, 30 minutes. And they'd be like, okay, yeah, he's up 10 to my 3 or 4, never, ever, ever did I have the guy ask for his rod back ever. And it happened for years. It was because once I learned that scenario, I was like, okay, I got a deal, guys. Well, one of you guys use my stuff and one of you guys not, just to test it. And then, oh yeah, Joe, you use it first, right? And so it works. But that showed the level of detail that a guide will use, because we're out there every day. And once you buy into that level of detail, Dude Maddox told me one time, the crazier it sounds in the detail, probably the more true it is. Now, I've heard some pretty crazy stuff, but a lot of times it's so true. And if it's not, I promise you fish it better because you believe it.
And when you're on the water, over 200 days out of the year, and you've tried a lot of different things under a lot of different conditions.
Yes.
That gives you some experience and gives you some trial and error and gives you some opportunity to build that background knowledge to make some of those decisions. And that's why it's so important to listen to these people that are on the water that much, that they have just that little bit of more knowledge in some of those variances and some of those oddities, like you said, that makes the difference. And we can always learn from other people. I've learned something today from you, and that's the thing, that you can't get caught in that comfort zone. Just keep expanding your knowledge and keep an open mind and keep learning, because there's just so many neat techniques out there and so many neat things are coming down the line. And just like you were talking about that, the different tails and the different spins, how they relate to the different miles per hour on your trolling. And, those are really minute things that make a big difference.
Huge difference.
And, I just appreciate, some of those things that you're sharing with us today.
Well, the last thing I'd tell you too is before, I don't know how much longer you're going to go, but yesterday I had a guy in here and he said something that kind of stuck with me a little bit. And I've always done it, but when he said it, it was really clear. He said, I go fishing with a lot of people that catch fish. And he said, I watch their hands, I watch their pole, I watch the detail of what they do, and then I copy it. And I thought, you know what? That's what you need to do. If you go with somebody that really catches them, it's not luck at all. It's definitely not luck. It's skill put together with equipment, location, and presentation. All right. I've talked enough. I don't know what you guys need to time.
I want to just say one thing to that is kind of interesting. You know, for 4 years, I was a boat captain for my son who fished the Lew's team tournament trail for bass. And so I had many hours in that boat of just coaching young men to try to catch fish. And that is one of the most helpless feelings in a tournament setting to try to teach them, especially trying to teach them on table rock in clear water with a fluke, that the only bite that's happening is on the fall in 30 feet of water. And you got to be able to detect that bite as it's falling through the water column. I'll never forget that day. I was like, you got a bite. Now, what? I don't know. You got a bite. Reel up. Go ahead. You know, and it got kind of to the point where, you know, it was almost kind of antagonistic after a while. No, I don't. Yes, I do. And and it, you know, but the thing is that, you know, the guys that do have a feel for that bite and understand what that bite is, you know, if you're really trying to emulate what they're doing, you really got to watch, you know,
details,
the little details. You know, how are they going a quarter of a turn when they lift it up?
Absolutely.
Are they lifting it up at a 45-degree angle? How fast are they lifting it up?
You bet.
You know, and you know, those little things make a big difference. But, you know, the other thing that makes a big difference that I just sitting here smiling on, and I keep listening to you, that it just makes me smile, is I've heard many times today that you alluding back to your faith and where you are with the Lord, and the fact that you said that, you know, you moved to Arkansas to change your life, and of course I know your friend structure, and I know what they stand for and their beliefs, and you know, that's one of the things that we look for and feel comfortable with. The people that we try to align with, we want to be with good people, and you're good people. And
well, I appreciate you saying that. I have to surround myself with good people because I know my tendencies. My tendencies are, if I'm not around good people, I can lend to be selfish, and I don't want to be that way. Yeah. And so being around Willie and the crew, you know, Cy and Jay and all of them, man, they just make me better people because they remind me of a Savior that died for me and paid for all the stupid mistakes I made, but then encourages me. Your life is better if you make good choices. Man, we had a Bible study here yesterday, and somebody said something that is so crisp and clean to me. Without God, life is full of chaos. And when in Genesis, when the Bible starts up, it shows the earth has no form. It's chaotic. And then God comes in and it says the Spirit of God comes in, and then everything starts going back together. And man, my life is no different. Without God, there's chaos. It doesn't feel like it at the time because I'm making these selfish choices, but then before I know it, I'm just, what happened? And God's warned me, that oven is hot. Don't do that, right? You're going to get burned. And so I'm just trying to surround myself with good people that can help me to remove the selfishness and bring the Spirit of God in so I can have peace and joy, because that's what all of us want. When there's chaos in our lives, the one thing we crave, peace.
Oh, yes.
Peace. Yeah. And so I know when I moved back to Arkansas, that's the only thing I wanted. Is I was tired of fighting and tired. And so people are hearing this and they're in that mode. It's because the Spirit of God's not living in you right now, but it can. You can become a child of God. King David in the Old Testament, when he was being killed and they were trying to kill him, he acted like he was a fool and was spitting all over himself. That's chaos. That was me in my life at that time. But one day become king. You know how I became king? Started believing in what God said and started following what he wanted for his life. And so I'm just surrounding myself with people that'll do that for me.
Oh, yes.
and avoid the chaos, because there's enough chaos going on right now.
Oh yes, that's for sure. I was in Deuteronomy this morning reading, and I was just thinking to myself, just kind of where we are in our world today, and I was just watching the sun come up out of my fireplace room there, and I was just thinking and thanking God for my family and just to be able to do what I love each and every day, and I was just thinking, there's so many people out there that are lost. There's so many people out there that just don't have that peace in their heart and that
Yeah.
serenity. And
Yeah.
the only way to have it is to have the Lord and to be a believer
You
and
bet.
have that faith and trust in God. And as we go into Easter here, wow, what a great opportunity to
Yeah.
celebrate our Christian belief. And
You
I'm just
bet.
looking forward to this weekend of just celebrating Jesus and just the
Yeah.
resurrection.
The interesting thing about that is what you just said. There's a lot of people that have that fireplace and watch the sun come up that don't have the peace.
That's right.
And they don't have a clue why it's not there. And they connected all the dots. They've got the fireplace. They've got the nice house. They're sitting in a beautiful location, but there's no peace. And that's because when the Spirit of God lives in us, it makes that moment more intentional. It makes that moment more peaceful. And I truly believe that. I believe that our life is different when the Spirit of God is in us. When I make choices that don't reflect the Spirit of God, chaos. It's just chaos.
Well, I tell you what, this is a great opportunity to go ahead and close with prayer, and that's what we do on our podcast. We always close
Awesome.
with prayer, and let's just go to the Lord in prayer, and we'll close with that. And we just want to thank everyone for tuning in to Royal Outdoor Experience, and hopefully today that you had a chance to pick up on some of the little details and some of the different things that Crappie Magnets and Jeff does to be successful. And we encourage you to go to his website, and you'll have a chance to see that on YouTube. And we just appreciate you, Jeff. And
Well, thanks for having me.
let's just go to the Lord in prayer.
You're right.
Dear Heavenly Gracious Father, we just thank you for giving this opportunity to interject with your belief and your faith that you give us, Lord. And as we go into the Easter season, and just let everyone understand that it's not about all the other things that go along with it that the materialistic world throws at us. It's about the resurrection of Jesus. And Lord, we just ask you to just be with our families as we travel and as we go see our families, and just let our fellowship glorify you. And Lord, just let our lives glorify you. And Lord, this platform that we have in the outdoors, just continue to bless us so that we can spread your word and just totally expand your kingdom, Lord. And Lord, we just thank you for Jeff Smith. Wow, what a great individual. Thank you so much for bringing him into our lives. And Lord, we just we lift him up to you. Lift up his business to you, his life, his family to you, Lord. And we just thank you for that time that we had today together. And Lord, as we move into this weekend, just let us rejoice in you and glorify you, Lord. And we thank you for everything you do. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. God bless you. Soar up them all.
Yes, right. That's right.